Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the AI Summer School, where we're looking at the data side of it and why that's important, especially when it comes to AI. The kind of like the key stat that I saw on this that I think's the one that kind of blew me away is that 90% of the public sector expects to pilot agentic AI within 2 to 3 years. But only 21% say that they have the data needed to use AI. So you can see there's quite a big gap here. And that's something that is a bit alarming, is something that we need to think about, but also proactively think about how we can fix it and kind of bring those two numbers together. So 90% expecting to use it, 21% so they're ready in the data sense. What could possibly go wrong? We'll talk about that today, but before I do any more, if you hear any jargon or you want anything called out, just hit that surprised face on the emoji reactions. And if you've got any questions, thoughts, queries, just pop them into the chat, and we can pick them up as we at the end. And then if there's anything else, we can kind of reply. And you've all got mine and Joe's emails. If there's any questions that is a bit more in depth, just email us directly. Again, just before going into it, I just thought it was quite interesting. Data is something that very close to my heart, believe it or not. And Nexa began as a data science company. We used to say, before we did big ideas, bold tech, better tomorrow, we used to do data for the cash strapped. And we worked a lot with charities, we worked with local authorities. We did all sorts of work looking at data and modeling around it. One thing that we have done, which is coming up to about 2 years, 2 years long as a project, is this thing of a national frailty index, which I think is a great example of something that shows how much data can do good. So it's basically, we know that there's 12 million over 65s. Using this sort of index, we've been able to look and try and find frailty where you have, and then use that to kind of estimate the number of falls that are going on amongst the over 65s. And then, kind of like see how that then equates into other statistics, like death figures and kind of like admissions into hospitals and stuff like that. And we know it's a big problem because, it's costing system-wide huge amounts of cash. So it's the sort of thing that we kind of go in and work out how to do it, kind of work over the course of 3 months to really work out what you can do with data and putting it all together. And the reason that I just wanted to bring it up now is because it's a great example of where data that sat there can just be put to work and do amazing things. So the frailty index kind of has about a 10% intervention success rate. These are very early figures, so we're kind of still working them through. It also has this kind of quite high return on investment, and I think that's the other thing with data. There's a lot of value in it. Unlocking it isn't always big projects. It can be quite small projects, but that value actually is disproportionately powerful. And it's making things proactive with data. So that's how it all fits together. We're kind of doing this one today, and there's a couple more. We are also, we'll kind of go through this at the end. We've kind of got a few other bits that we're thinking about. So all that said, let me crack on with what is data. So, these sorts of things, we're trying to avoid any jargon starting from first principles. So data is a term that's often misunderstood because it is so broad. But essentially, for these sorts of conversations around AI, it's any information that is held or made, and that can be in a structured format, like a database or something like that, where it's kind of all nicely laid out in fields, or like a CRM or something, or it can be unstructured, like loads of stuff dumped into PDF files, for instance. It can be digital, it can be voice, it can be paper-based stuff. There's a load of different forms of information out there, and this data in this broad sense covers off all of that. So it could be case records, spreadsheets, emails, sensors, readings off sensors, images or system logs or things the computers are making themselves that is covered off by this. The thing that's kind of the relevance to all of this is that those data sets could be used to maybe train an AI system. It could be used to inform how you make decisions within it, or support decisions within it, or the design of it. And it could be processed by an AI tool. So that's why the foundations of this stuff are so important. You need to be able to kind of really understand what's sat there because it's going to be used in so many different ways. Where does data fit into AI is actually quite a good thing because it there's so many different variations of it. It actually fits in many places. We have this idea of different layers of AI. So if we start with the thing that we see the most, like the interfaces that we're using, so those Google summaries that pop up every time you search for something, or ChatGPT or Copilot, or even kind of like smaller tools that are ubiquitous these days, like you start writing an email and it gives you those suggestions. All of that is using kind of data that's from other layers of AI, but all of those things are also generating data. So they may be using the AI that's in the large language model, but they'll also generate the data, which is what you've typed into it, when you typed it in, how many questions you used, whether you then went on to be satisfied with it or not. All of those things are also being created. So there's kind of tons of data just in that first bit before we delve a bit deeper. The next step is the tools and the services that are running like under the hood there. Um, and these are the things that, so it's kind of like if you're using a large language model, that model has been trained on um, lots of data. It's also using data itself to see how it's performing. Like, is it, how much does it cost per run? How long is it taking to compute an answer? All of that stuff is generating further data as well. And then underneath that is something that is kind of quite an interesting sort of layer. It's called the ontology layer, but it's the context essentially. And this is something that has been put in so that the tools and the systems and services and everything like that are able to make sense of the raw data that sits underneath it, which is the final layer. That's what we looked at on the last slide. That's the sort of thing that can be spreadsheets, it can be emails, it can be whatever you want. This is all around us and kind of the thing that I think most of us think about when we think about data. But you can see here how it starts stacking into these different layers of AI, all the way from the top down to the bottom. And actually, it is a bit of a sort of a loop, as in all of that stuff is then feeding back into this sort of raw data or content that we have there that's then feeding back into this. So you can see quite quickly it's kind of like a proliferation of this stuff. And that's why it's so important to understand it. The summary of the data problem, and I've paraphrased here, is threefold. If you put garbage in to literally any system, you will get garbage out. And that is it. And that's often the problem that we face. Digging underneath that, there's a lot that we do with AI tools increasingly within the public sector. And I think, what we want to do is to kind of call out the fact that AI tools will work with what they've been trained on, and they will also work with in operation with what they're given. And public sector wise will often further lock stuff down. So, the AI that you're using at home on Google is reading the entire internet. Public sector wise, we'd be like, no, 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 we don't want that. We want it to focus on one specific problem or use case or data set. So what we're actually doing for good reason is locking down the data it can use. But that kind of puts more obligation on making sure that the data that we are giving it is accurate. So AI is only as good as what you feed it. And things like incomplete records or inconsistent things or outdated things can very quickly kind of drop in and be like a bit of a poison pill. And that's something that you need to kind of be aware of. And it can feel a bit overwhelming that it's like, right, everything needs to be perfect. It could be that you start off with things and you use this process in order to build up confidence in the data and the tool. But in that case, it's very important to say that your confidence level in the tool is a lower level, and then it will be worked up to a high level. Bad data can lead to biased outcomes or wrong sort of like decisions. It is making these kind of like calls as to what the right answer is. So when it's being used in a professional support context, you want to make sure that it is very very accurate and not given the wrong sorts of answers. When it's being used for things like targeting or profiling or anything along those lines, that's where it's like triply so. AI can't guess what good is. If it hasn't got any reference as to what good is, it doesn't know what it is, and it'll repeat what's there. You do get this kind of argument around what is called synthetic data, when you can use AI to make data, which has come on in leaps and bounds, but is still prone to a lot of the issues that you get with, kind of incomplete data in the first set when you're building up, like a model or a tool or an operating system. I kind of think of it a lot like the frog DNA in Jurassic Park, which, if anyone's seen the films, they've got gaps in the DNA, and they put in the frog DNA, and that's what leads to calamity at the end. That's a very 90s film reference, but basically that just the way that it's kind of stuck in my head. So, what are the risks of this sort of stuff? If data is incomplete, it could be, if you're using it to do risk stratification, something that there's great potential for, and a lot of people are looking to do with it. Incomplete referral records could miss people who are digitally excluded, say. Or it could be something that, if you've trained your tools working in a local authority that's predominantly rural, and then you bring it to an urban city setup, it may not be that that works because there's differences in the data sets. There can be some commonality, but actually there are other things going on there that you would want to look at. These are all the sorts of things of, kind of just flagging up and thinking about as you kind of move forward. There is a legal burden upon us. I shouldn't say burden, obligation, a safety net really, and guardrails that we have there. So there's GDPR, which is kind of asking for a sense of fairness in AI systems. There's also the Equalities Act, which is where a lot of data sets can be biased, kind of is coterminous with other um, characteristics that are protected under the equality law. And also there's the public sector equality duty, which is, when you get into this sort of algorithmic world, an algorithm is just basically a set of predefined rules and regulations that you get told a machine to do. It needs to be tested for discrimination. So these are the key areas that you need to cover off, and you'll all have information governance, data protection colleagues, perhaps some on this call, definitely some in your organization. They really know this stuff inside out, and actually, kind of like a lot of them have been thinking very closely and carefully about how AI can impact. So always worth going to have a conversation with them. The things that kind of we typically kind of look for is things like who owns the data, who's accountable for it, how fresh is it, what's the legal basis for the use of it. Are you using all of the data that you need? Are you using some of it? Are you using too much data? And that's the thing of, like, you don't always need to feed everything in to work out what's going on. It could be that things could be anonymized, pseudonymized. It could be that you only need a couple of aspects of a care record to do something, not everything. Also, how long are you keeping it for? Where are you keeping it? And when will you delete it? All of these are really important things to think about. All of this is kind of leading to this idea of, well, what could potentially go wrong, and what do you need to think about? You've got different sorts of bias. So you can have a bias where people are putting the wrong information in. So that could be inconsistent. It could be incomplete data. You can have bias in the rules that you've put into the machine to make it work, and there could be inadvertent bias there. And then it can also be seen in the outcome. So it could be that you've gotten to the point where actually you think everything there's working fine, but it's still producing biased outcomes. This gives us a few different opportunities to see if there is bias in the system and where data kind of governance could be applied. So that's kind of thinking about it overall. And there's some great things out there that we use: data protection impact assessments, equality impact assessments, information security from kind of like a cybersecurity point of view, and location of data. These are documents that will exist within your organization in the public sector, and use them. They're not to be avoided. They're not like they're your friend, basically. They give you all of these different guardrails. And like for us, we prefer to do all of this up front. And I think, as we said last week, getting this stuff sorted early in a project means that you can then proceed with confidence, and you're not, kind of like question marking, is this the right outcome? Is this the wrong outcome? And you're not going to do anything that's going to get you or your organization in trouble, because you're working with colleagues who are kind of deeply versed in it. So I always say, go and get your friendly neighborhood data, business intelligence, CRM systems, or IT person a cup of tea and ask what they think. And that's because often coming up with great ideas, you kind of then hit into this the reality that sometimes what's there and the systems that are there and the data that's there is not, as one would kind of want in an ideal world. There are several legacy systems in your organization right now. Legacy is a very polite way of saying old IT systems, and the public sector has a preponderance of these for various reasons. Sometimes it was like long-term contracts. Sometimes it's a system that's so ingrained into the organization to move away from it, it just kind of scares everyone, and it's just too much to do. But legacy systems aren't always great at sharing data amongst one another. And a lot of the tools that we're using these days kind of want to use data as much as possible and from different sources. So the legacy system data sharing and kind of structuring often become one of the bigger barriers that we have. There are ways to get around it, and the person who knows that best maybe a very long-suffering colleague who's kind of already getting a lot of requests for data reporting and stuff like that. And then sometimes these AI tools can kind of emerge and be like, oh yeah, it's fine, we'll fix it. There's a magic wand. Yeah, there can be, but you kind of like, you still need to do all of the data work beforehand and all of the governance work up front. So just go and give them a cup of tea, sit down and just hear what they think. It will save you so much time in the long run. So there can be things like different formats, different standards, different definitions across departments. Some people may be serving residents, some people may be serving clients, some people may be serving people. If you just think about all of the different ways that we talk about the people that we work with in terms of providing a service to, that shows you how inconsistent things like a format, a standard, and definitions can be overall. There often are manual workarounds. And again, I'm sure there's some wry smiles on this call when I say, downloading stuff into a CSV and then it getting emailed across is probably more common than any of us would like to admit. There's lots of workarounds, and that is necessary, but we have to acknowledge that we can introduce errors as humans doing this stuff. So that's just something that can crop in, and sometimes those errors actually get embedded into the technical system, and that's where we also need to watch what's happening. Some of these systems do have the ability to share, but it's very expensive to do so. This is because that what is now ubiquitous functionality was very rare back in the day when a lot of these things were put together, and that kind of cost is still associated with it. There are also imperfect migrations between systems. So, on the occasion when people have moved from one to another, sometimes the data has not been the primary focus, it's been the system migration, not what was in it. And that can lead to situations where you end up with kind of like data perhaps being taken from structured to unstructured. So it's kind of gone from a database into something else. It could be that not all of the data was brought across, it was put together, or fields swapped places. There's a lot of different variations of that. Again, this is all of the stuff that can be then. It's worth flagging up just to think about, especially at the beginning when you're going to go into an AI project. So you've got your eyes wide open to these things, and asking the question and hearing the answers, no, that's fine, is always brilliant. If the answer's not sure, finding that out can save you a huge ton of trouble later on. So this is a real example that we've seen in a few instances where different systems have different ideas of what the baseline level is. So what I mean by that is, if you think about an Excel spreadsheet, what is each row? So you've got all the columns with all the stuff in, all the information, but what is each row? So looking at it, it means that perhaps a social care system, each row may be a care package. In a housing system, each row may be a property. In in an HR system, each row may be a person. In a NHS system, it may be that each row is a episode of care. So one property could have 4 people, each with 3 care packages that within them have 12 episodes of care. So you can kind of see this sort of like flow diagram of how it can kind of split out. So that means if you're joining these things together, it may mean that you've got to roll things up and then roll them back down. And that kind of means you take those episodes of care, put them into a care package, put that to a person, and put that to a property. But it may be that you're more interested in the care packages than the property, and you can see how it can get quite complex quite quickly. That process is called crosswalking, and it's something that data scientists do a lot. And often in that situation, like we approach it by trying to put a scaffold in. And by that, I mean just a common system that you can start putting everything into, and then kind of fill in the blanks as you go. So this sort of thing of systems not talking to each other, data being in different formats and structures, is something that can eat up a lot of time, especially in those early pieces, but is by no means a insurmountable barrier, and definitely worth kind of understanding as you move forward. So this is again, this is kind of like the scary bit, I guess. There's something called the AI failure index. It's very important to keep on top of for folk like me who are thinking about how these systems work in the real world across public sector. I've very unfairly picked on the DWP here. If there's anyone on the call from the DWP, sorry, it was just kind of it just pinged up. But here you can see the sorts of things that are going on and are kind of public failures that are appearing in, kind of like national newspapers. And it's the place that we don't, we never want to be there. There's the degree of like reputational damage, but often these are things that hurt people that we're trying to help. So that's, we want to stay away from here. And that's why it's so important to kind of really take that step back and think about what are we about to do and what are we going to do it with and how does it fit together. So there's 683 global examples in there. Definitely, we'll put it in the links at the end and share about. But I think that's something, just go off and have a look and see if there's anything that's close to the project you're thinking about doing. That's what we do. And that's really good because it means you can learn from those mistakes. You can see where data is appearing in these. So AI fraud detection system found to be biased against vulnerable groups. The algorithm wrongly flagging benefit claimants for fraud model showing bias. We've seen this so far. Some of these are algorithmic, but potentially it's because the algorithm's been trained on incomplete data sets. And this is where when you start looking into it, people who are digitally excluded won't appear in these data sets, for instance, or it could be that, disproportionately it's picking up on a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act. All of these things have happened, and I think definitely do learn from them. And DWP is doing a load of great stuff as well. And I think, some of these are older pieces, but you can kind of see that there were some very painful lessons learned. So I always say, kind of learn from these, and then we need to move on. So that's kind of the bits that can go wrong. In terms of getting your data ready, there's quite a lot of stuff that you can do, and hopefully you're with me and you've not all dropped off because it is too scary. That's very much the stuff that we need to be aware of because of the problems. This is how we can then proactively move to a place where we're happy and we've got a load of stuff going on. So we kind of work on this 3-tier checklist, which I'll just run through now. And we'll include this in the slides and, this sort of structure. Take it, use it. If you want any advice on it, just drop us a line. But hopefully it's fairly self-evident. And this is the summary of it. So there's more that we can dig into. So before you do anything at all, before you commit to a single thing, there's a foundation layer. And we kind of work in this sort of foundation and then up 3-tier process. So is the data accurate? Is it complete? Is it up to date? Are there no gaps? This is everything that we've kind of run through, and some, the main cause of a lot of the issues we've seen. Who owns it and who's accountable and who's using it and how do they know it's of a quality that they can use it? That's again super important. Some of these different sorts of data sets, if we go way back to the beginning, it's not just spreadsheets. It could be people who are using a CRM. Are they using it religiously, day in, day out for everything? Or is it something that they have to update for an hour on a Friday afternoon and it's okay? Just knowing all of that really can help you inform what you're going to do as you go through it. When you're looking at using data, are you doing so lawfully? And is there a data protection impact assessment that kind of goes, right, the reason that we're doing this is because we have a statutory obligation to do this work. If it isn't under that sort of legal basis, it could be something that can still go ahead, but then it requires consent. And that distinction there is also just so important in terms of the GDPR aspects, but also, you want to do stuff with people, not to them. And I think that is really kind of them understanding what you're doing, why consent's important, and then moving on is just very important, like kind of a critical idea behind the consent piece. And then, do you know where the data is? And who, then that can be kind of like, is it on a server somewhere? Is it in a system somewhere? Is it on a shared drive somewhere? And who else is using it? So that's the other element, that you don't want to kind of go in and cut across other things that are going on, but also whoever else is using it may also have a sense of the quality of it and how to use it and ideas around that. So in that spirit that we said last week of getting everyone around the table, do definitely explore where that's going on within your organization. The next bit that we look onto is acceleration. So say everything there is a big green tick. That's amazing. Let's move on to the next bit, which is how do we get the most out of this as quickly as possible and prove value? And as I said, there's a lot of stuff in here that, really data when unlocked is really cool. And it need not always be massive projects. You can very quickly find out interesting stuff that can help improve service provision. So is the data accessible in a usable format? Can it be taken out and can it be connected into an AI tool or into other data sets or into a data science studio without months and months and months of manual rework? If there's, an initial bit where you're able to just understand things manually and then turn that into automatic stuff, that is also, kind of doable. But it's when it introduces a whole ton of manual stuff, that's not going to accelerate things. That'll make things slower. So that's worth checking. Always check with small data sets or small sections of it, samples. Try and make sure they're representative samples to just get the most in your trial periods. And then, this is something that perhaps we should move it back into the foundation piece. What is it you're trying to do with this? Is there a spear and clear and specific answer question that you're looking to answer, or a use case that you're looking to support? So, it can get, in data science, we have a phrase, getting the meatballs get lost in the sauce. You don't want to get lost in the sauce. Always focus on, like, what is your meatball, basically. And then finally, you kind of move to this thing of like adoption, and you've got something and it's there. How do you make sure that you've got something there that you can kind of like scale across the organization if appropriate, or kind of keep going on the long term? So does information governance cover ongoing use, or has it thought too much about the pilot phase? Or and that sounds a bit like pejorative, it isn't. It's often when you're working on a pilot, you may not know what's happening next. So are you going back and looking at your data protection? Are you looking at your information governance? You're looking at cybersecurity as a regular ongoing process. A lot of information governance colleagues will say that these are living documents. Absolutely take them at face value and do revisit often. They're there to protect us. Not using them as guardrails is, like at our own peril, be it. So that's just again a big shout out. Is there a plan for monitoring the quality of data? So that could be what's going into it or the outcomes of what it's doing. So if it's, helping with decision making, are you monitoring those decisions being made? Are you perhaps doing a blind test against a human decision making process and seeing how they come up to expectation? Have you retrospectively applied what you're doing to known outcomes so you can see how it works? There's lots of things that you could do. And again, it's all about this ongoing process, like not letting it fall off the radar. Have you built in this sort of assurance and quality assurance and ongoing piece? Like, so it could be testing of the tool against expected outcomes. Could be that if you've got a chatbot, what you'd like it to answer for a bank of a few hundred questions. Are you checking that it does those? And you can do that automatically. Checking it's answering those questions every time you make a change within the system. It's that sort of thing that really helps provide the assurance to increase our confidence to drive adoption and trust in the system. And do the people who are working with these things actually feel confident to do so, totally get all of the concepts, why they're doing stuff, have the skills to do it? And this is something that, it's a bit weird as a supplier to hear us say this, but we don't really want to create things that people then have to always come back to us forever and ever. And, for a lot of us in the public sector, there's going to be a lot of changes in the way that we work because of this, because of the pressure to use this and to kind of get the benefits of it. And I think it's one of those things, as we said in week one, it's not that AI is coming to take your job, but it will change the nature of your work forever. And I think this is where, there's a lot of stuff in terms of data management, quality assurance, making sure it's working, almost like line management of a new colleague that happens to be a tool as opposed to a person because it's got these sorts of qualities, is something that we're going to be thinking about a lot more and more. And that's not just something for technical colleagues to think about. If you're managing people or you want to manage people and you think about how you manage them, think about how you would manage these tools, not just in the way that you manage them, but also in the way that they interact with one another. This is kind of the sorts of things that you start thinking about in the adoption stage. But just to go all the way back, foundation wise, and if you're there and you're thinking about using this stuff, go through those questions because you can see how they then build into the point where you can then really let rip when you move to the acceleration stage. And then you can then get it embedded and across and adopted across an organization and really making like a big difference. And again, we've seen the transformative power of these tools in increasing resident satisfaction, increasing like professional efficiency, kind of making services fuller, better, self-serving. There's a lot of good stuff. The public sector has some great examples, and I showed you the failure index. Public sector data is beautiful, and there's some cool stuff going on. What I thought I'd just quickly run through is kind of what the playbook could look like. And so this is a bit of a flow diagram of a real operational system that's really focused in on a data science example. So this is where you can see how it builds together. So this is one that we've kind of looked at a few times, where you're looking at health data, housing data, social care data, income, revs and bends stuff, census data, and third-party data that's out there in the world. So taking all of those data sets and kind of understanding what's in them, who maintains them, why you would use them, and then working out the structure of them, the context of them, and work the interoperability of them, then allows you to pull that all together into a unified data set focused on people over time. So it could be focused at properties over time. It could be focused at cases over time. It kind of really allows you to stitch things together in a way that gives you a coherent picture. Now, I wouldn't ever recommend starting off with all of those things and putting them together because you learn a lot along the way and it's kind of this iterative process. But what we can say is that we've seen as soon as you start putting two or more data sets together, you end up with an entirely new perspective on something and insights you've not seen before. So it's definitely worth starting and then seeing how you build out. And the way that you would do that is by understanding what your use case was and what you were trying to do with it. Once that's pulled together, you then get these sorts of organic insights as you go through and kind of start kind of understanding the data. And also you can test hypotheses, and it could be something along the lines of, well, we think that, people on their second contact with the local authority tend to get 3 times as many services compared to their first contact because they're more familiar with how the local authority works, for instance. There's all of these sorts of hypotheses that are out there that bringing these elements together begins to allow you to look at. It allows you to analyze and optimize things based on new variables, and that could be as simple as if you see someone in a health, a housing, and a social care database that have not been put together, you would just be able to see if that person was in those 3 databases. That would allow you to say, well, actually, what we want to do is optimize their experience by, kind of like making sure they were aware of what's happening service-wise across all 3 pieces. Or perhaps it's you want to flag up to colleagues in another department that there's a likely trigger of behavior happening that you want to use. There's lots of different things that you can start looking into. And then the other part is you're able to automatically flag things for review in that way. So it could be that, if someone's got 3 or 4 interactions with a service, that they should be referred to another. This is the sort of thing that people like Policy and Practice are doing a lot of really interesting work looking at low-income family trackers and stuff like that. There's a lot of interesting elements. I mean, we're certainly looking at it with National Frailty Index, where if you're seeing someone expressing a need to a local authority in one way, that could be like a assisted bin collection or a blue badge. Is that being gap now analysed against things like adult social care? And is there, kind of support that could be given, potentially preventative, that allows them to kind of get the most from public services? At that point, when you've kind of gone through all of these things, you're then able to get to the point where you could use things for like machine learning. And that could be where it's more professional support and triage pieces, where, it could be that you're looking to provide a ordered risk list of people that you found for, who probably need like an urgent case review or something like that automatically. When it comes to machine learning, what that really means is you know enough about your data that you're confident in creating a algorithm, a set of rules, or you're confident in letting the machine create one that you can check, that then you can use in an operational context in the way that you would perhaps begin to defer to a colleague's judgment. So I think that's where the machine learning piece comes in, and that's where this can really operate at scale. The reason that we kind of go through all of these different stages to get to that point is to avoid the issues that we saw earlier, where skipping out these steps can lead to bias, it can lead to inconsistency, it can lead to discrimination. So that's kind of how it fits together. And this is a beautiful diagram of what, like people like me who do a lot of data science go, this is what it would be like in an ideal world. Let me show you what it looks like in the real world. And that you can see there's a lot of stuff going on. And this isn't something that's in production at all. This was very much just like a first draft of, let's try to understand what the hell is going on. So all of the things on the left-hand side there, the pale blue squares, are just different data sources. And we've used lots of different stuff there. We've kind of used uploads of CSVs. We've kind of used tying into systems. And then at that point, we're looking to bring data together, merge it into different places, and you can kind of see where the lines go together. And then we kind of tidy it all up, and then it proliferates again into these different versions where we're kind of going, what happens if we group it by household or by person or by case or by episode? And then what if we loop that all the way back into something else and see how it goes? And this is kind of like the necessary messy stage that allows you to really figure out what's happening. And then at the end of it, you kind of end up with these kind of like engineered data sets that then can feed into tools. The other part with this is, as we're going through, we're kind of documenting what each of these boxes means. And then if you imagine each one of these boxes is like an Excel spreadsheet, we're then going in and kind of saying, well, each of these columns, what they mean and what we would expect to see in them and what the minimum and the maximum value would be. So all of that information is in there that when we give it to an AI machine, it can understand all of the rules and all of the context and all of what we're expecting, and then take it on from there. So this is a very kind of like messy, showing you the plumbing, but this is the sort of work that can go into it and taking data from very unstructured raw formats into something that can be very precisely designed and engineered to fit a specific purpose. So with that, it's clear to see the potential's only emerging. We're only able to see, like we've barely scratched the surface of this stuff. And it's not even like the most advanced AI bit. It's the bit where we get our house in order and understand what we've got there, and then think about how we can use that, not just to generate insight, but to turn that insight into intelligence. And if Jazz Rasul's on the call, a shout out to his model, that actually we want to turn this stuff into wisdom. We really want to turn that into something that has like deep, profound, universal sort of applicability that really helps us, really accelerate what we're doing, really reconfigure service, really get into it. But we're kind of, again, just at the foothills of this stuff. So how do we build up that picture. So it's quite exciting times to be doing this. And if you're thinking about stuff, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do, but that'll just be like hygiene factors. That'll be like, not smoking at a petrol station, putting your seatbelt on when you're running a car. Those things don't put us off using cars, right? That's where we are. But the first time that you put on a seatbelt, you'd be like, oh no, this all feels a bit weird. That's kind of what all that earlier stuff is. This is really now thinking about how can we drive this on for really interesting work. So what we have here is an example of the output of a engineered data set, and this was looking at the support package type against the category of care or suggested solution given. And this is looking at how they relate to one another within a financial year for a group of people. That has kind of just transformed the way that we look at financial modeling of public service. So if you kind of compare this to a really big Excel spreadsheet that maybe has a graph, but is normally just tables, this very quickly kind of gives us a sense of between support reason and package of care delivered, or kind of like solution given, support given. You can see these relationships quite clearly. And that's something that has been pulled together from a few different data sets and put into one with a view of kind of going, well, let's look at the people who are there, but instead of the base unit of this being people, we're looking at the amount of cash spent on each one, and that gives us a sense of how commissioning works, how brokerage works, how if you were looking to redefine the service, you would then say, well, this is interesting, let's dig into it. And also this view is so easy that, if you're a colleague there, you may kind of say, well, actually that big orange line looks a bit weird. What's that about? It really allows people to engage in different ways. And I think this is the sort of thing as you go through on data projects, it's so exciting because you can present information that's there, that's, kind of there and then synthesized into something new, or kind of more amalgamated into something new in ways that are very special. The National Frailty Index is kind of one of the ways that we've done it. So we kind of looked at things. So this is a geographical breakdown of different frailty profiles across the UK. And what we did here was we engineered a data set using census data. We then kind of spoke to a lot of local authorities to validate that this was, broadly speaking, correct. This is something I would say we could kind of sit at a 50 to 60% confidence level in terms of operationalizing. So it's not 100% by any means, but it's enough to get a sense of what's going on. And then we just looked at England and Wales and went to an AI. If you could use statistical modeling, could you give us different profiles of different local authorities based on nothing apart from their frailty? So you can see here that we've kind of been able to break up the country into these 5 different groups. There's a kind of, and with different frailty profiles, I should say. So each one of these, so you've kind of got urban diversity in magenta, which is basically London. You've got the green kind of areas outside cities, which is suburban comfort. You've then got purple areas, which is balanced communities. You've then got a coastal and rural mix that goes on, and they're kind of like the pinky ones around the outside. No, in the turquoise. And then you've got traditional communities in the coral. So you can see here that that's given us a different view on frailty, and potentially this gives us a different way of thinking about how we would work together as local authorities, right? You may go, well, actually, if I'm in the northeast, I should be talking to people in North and South Wales and the southwest, not just my nearest neighbours. In fact, you can also see where you've got different deviation between stuff. So this is very, very much kind of like looking at stuff in a totally different way. What is really interesting, hopefully kind of comes across in this, is that I've just taken, maybe a minute to explain a visual that should feel quite intuitive, and using data and kind of the engineering behind it means that you can take stuff and kind of go, look, this is interesting, here's an insight, can we draw any operational intelligence from it, and what would that be? But it's fairly universal, like you can understand it compared to just tons and tons and tons of tables and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of where this stuff, we're just looking at the foothills of it. Now if you were to take this and then map it into local authority data and then use that to feed an AI that gave you conversational intelligence instead of a dashboard, you would then really be able to do it for things like designing, community hubs, neighborhood teams, service provision. Have a look at your brokerage and what's going on in terms of adult social care. But I'm sure colleagues from all different areas would see that, this could be used in different ways. This is one of those dashboards. And you can just see here that you've kind of got this sense of like, where is frailty, but also where is frailty amongst younger and older people. So, that's kind of an emerging thing to kind of really question, is it just the over 65s? Or are there younger cohorts? This has allowed us to really answer that question quickly. And then comparing that against something like, how does that compare to how things are being spent on the cash point of view? So these are very different sorts of metrics that are very available from the data that we have once we've gone through that process of kind of tidying it up. So that was it, about 45 minutes on data and everything like that. I will just, before I come to the questions, I'll just quickly run through just the next stuff in summer school. We have procurement and risks for AI projects. So that's something that we're very keen on talking about and kind of explaining the red flags and the green flags that we went through last week, and actually what that means in terms of getting it sorted and going through procurement. As a supplier, we've been through procurement in a few ways. We've also consulted 2 other suppliers in the early days of AI to help them figure out what they should do. And we've also worked a lot with information and governance and data protection colleagues on the local authority side. So there's a lot in there that, that are just handy tips and things to think about, that really ultimately what we're trying to do here is de-risk these projects and kind of give you the safest, most confident way to get the best stuff to people. So that's kind of what next week will be about. And then, unfortunately, we've had to push back our week 5 to the 10th of September. So it's kind of summer into autumn school. So that'll be the 10th of September, and that's the final one, which is about ethics, governance, and public trust. You can see we've spoken about it a bit there, but it's really, the final capstone of what's going on. As ever, you can't make any of these live. We'll share the recordings afterwards, so nobody misses out. I think that is it. I will just stop sharing and come back to the room, and lovely to see so many people here. Amazing. Hi. I never know, I can't see who's in the room. I always come back and just dread this sense that there'll be no one left. Okay, cool. Just having a look through the chat. Jazz, that's a great point. The outcomes can be filtered by humans in a biased way. That's absolutely true. And I think with a lot of these things, it can end up being the sort of thing that human bias is a real thing as well. That's why we have these discrimination laws. AI can inherit those, or it can challenge those. The recordings of the last 2 sessions, Joe shared the link and we will send it on. And Jane, thank you for the feedback, and Florida too. Any other questions from colleagues in the room? No? I will, in that case, if there's not anything more, I will return the 10 minutes that we have left. And thanks a lot for coming along today. This was the data session. Come along next week and we'll do procurement, risk, and all those good things in making it happen. If you've got any thoughts or questions, let us know. I'll pull out some of the slides and send them to Joe, and Joe will send them all around to you. We'll update that invitation back to the 10th. And thanks a lot for coming along. Any thoughts, emails, questions, whatever, email me. And Jazz, we'll share, actually, if you've got a few links you want to send round to the group, we'll put it in the email and take it from there. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining us today, and enjoy your week. Bye.